You are watching Canadian Muslim news on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with Justice for All Canada and their call for you to sign their petition, calling on the federal government to help protect India's Muslim minorities. But first, some news headlines. Marvel's first Muslim Pakistani superhero series debuts. Muslim delegates discuss Islamophobia with federal officials. Justice for All Canada asks government to protect Indian Muslims. First Hajj pilgrims from outside Saudi arrive after 2 years. And now the details. Disney has released the first episode of Ms. Marvel, featuring Ontario's very own Iman Vellani as their first Muslim superhero. 19-year-old Vellani stars as Kamala Khan, a superhero megafan in New Jersey who discovers she has powers. The show follows Khan as she juggles high school, family, and her newfound abilities. Speaking to local media, Vellani says Kamala's character and story is very similar to her own experiences growing up a Pakistani Muslim in Ontario. Vellani's role is the Marvel Cinematic Universe's first female South Asian hero. She is expected to don her costume once again in 2023 for a sequel. Government officials, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, met with community leaders across Canada earlier this week to discuss Islamophobia and systemic racism. The National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, facilitated the meetings in Ottawa as part of their Advocacy Day. This commemorates the 1-year anniversary of the attack on a Muslim family in London, Ontario. In these meetings, NCCM brought up their national action plan to combat hate and Islamophobia, which includes 35 recommendations for the federal government. In a tweet, the Prime Minister referred to the London incident as a, quote, terrorist attack, and says he is committed to rooting out discrimination. Justice for All Canada was in Ottawa last week to convey their human rights concerns over Canada's growing trade with India. Speaking to the Standing Committee on International Trade, Executive Director Taha Gayoor says the government must prioritise the protection of vulnerable minorities. He adds that the government should not be silent as Muslims are targeted in India. Gayoor recommends the committee keep international conventions of human rights and protections a precondition to any economic relations with India.
The BJP government has instituted notorious citizenship laws that disproportionately target over 200 Indian Muslims. Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, for instance, is a law that protects minorities from several countries surrounding India, but conveniently excludes Muslim refugees. The United Nations described the CAA as fundamentally discriminatory. BJP has repressed, raided, harassed, and shut down over 19,000 NGOs in India and Kashmir since coming to power in 2014, and in particular Amnesty International India, which was shut down last year. Genocide Watch has issued 2 genocide warnings concerning Muslims in India.
Hajj pilgrims from Indonesia have landed in the city of Medina, from where they will travel to the holy city of Mecca. It is the first group of pilgrims from outside the kingdom after 2 years of restrictions due to the coronavirus pandemic, state media reported. Saudi Arabia last month announced it would allow 1 million people from within and outside the kingdom to perform Hajj. The pilgrimage will take place in July. Last year, there were about 60,000 pilgrims, and less than 1,000 performed Hajj in 2020. Typically, the annual pilgrimage draws about 2.5 million people to Mecca. That's how many people participated in 2019, the last Hajj before the coronavirus outbreak. And that's it for the news. India's Muslims, Christians, and other minorities are under attack. Hijab bans, lynchings, threats to mosques. Justice for All Canada has a petition that's calling on the Trudeau government to do something about it. To talk to us today, we have Saleha Faruque. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show, Communications Manager with Justice for All Canada.
Walaikum salam, and thank you again for having me.
It's our pleasure. You're a regular guest. We get updates on the campaigns and issues around the world that you are spotlighting that not many other people spotlight. Today we're going to talk about a petition that you've launched that's calling on the Trudeau government to help do something about India's persecution of its minorities. Tell us about the petition, please.
For sure. So it is a parliamentary petition. It is something that Canadians can do in their House of Commons to try to amplify a community concern in the eyes of the federal government. So if you'd like, I could perhaps go through some of the demands that the e-petition covers. The rest of the information, your audience can definitely take a look by visiting saveindia.ca. So we're basically asking the federal government, in particular Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, to acknowledge a series of discriminatory laws that have been enacted by the BJP-led government in India. Just to keep in mind that they are a nationalist right-wing government. We're also asking them to acknowledge a recent rise in genocide, particularly a genocidal threat against minorities. We're asking them to include human rights experts in all bilateral as well as trade relations as they grow with India. We're also asking to implement Magnitsky sanctions against certain government leaders. And lastly, but certainly not least, we are requesting that the government develops a multilateral strategy with India to help promote and safeguard the rights and equality of the various persecuted minorities that we focus on.
So those are very clear demands. I want to get back to why you've included those in the petition, but let's just focus a little bit more on the petition itself. I believe that a petition, you mentioned it's a way for community concerns to reach the federal government, but it needs a MP as a sponsor. And you've got an NDP MP from Edmonton, Blake Desjardins. How did he get involved in this?
That's a great question. I think that since we have relaunched the organization, we've done a very good job at outreach. So we've expanded our outreach here in Ontario. We have, for example, one campaign manager in Ottawa. We have our team here in the GTA, and we've also have a really great team in Alberta, Edmonton, and not to mention also a series of volunteer coalitions in all of these respective areas. So I have to give credit where it's due. It's really our Alberta campaign manager as well as the team there that have really developed inroads and done their due diligence in doing that communication work with just their local leaders. And I think that when it comes to NDP MP Blake, he's very in tune with the needs of his local constituents. An interesting fact about him is that he does have an Indigenous background himself. And I think that he holds very dear the challenges and the grievances of ethnic people and Indigenous peoples. And that is one of the big reasons why he kind of gave time to listen to our demands. As I do just want to add that one of the minorities that we do advocate for in India are Indigenous minorities as well in the region.
So then he sensed a parallel between the discrimination against Indigenous peoples in Canada with the discrimination that's going on in India, and that made him want to put forward the petition.
That is precisely what he part of that discussion that he had with the team. I also think that he took time to listen to a range of diverse Canadians in Alberta, everyone from professionals to students to various community members, to listen to their concerns. And I think that he's just also doing his job at representing the different human rights concerns that Canadians have in his region.
So you mentioned, let's just go over a couple of these demands. The first demand is that the Trudeau acknowledge the Indian government's discriminatory anti-minority laws. That seems like a very innocuous demand. Is it a difficult thing for the Trudeau government to do?
We certainly don't think so. I think that India is quite known for two specific anti-minority laws that really trump a lot of their other laws that they have. So we're talking about the Citizenship Amendment Act, as well as the National Register of Citizens, one of which makes it incredibly difficult for Muslim refugees to obtain protection in India, or refugee status, if you will. The other one, the CAA, makes it is currently threatening the citizenship of over 200 million Muslim minorities. These are quite complex laws, and they are also applied in very ambiguous ways, unfortunately, by the nationalist government. And so that is why, and also they've drawn criticism from the likes of, Amnesty Canada, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, as well as countless other really.
So let me just pause you there. Let me just pause you there. So you're kind of giving the perspective of those who believe that there's discrimination, but the first thing in the petition is kind of implying that we want the Trudeau government to acknowledge this, as if that's going to be a difficult thing. But you've given sort of like from the human rights perspective why it's not difficult. But if the Trudeau government needs a petition to do that, then what does that tell us about the Trudeau's government relationship with India? They should be doing it already without you guys doing a petition. I think that's what, I'm not asking the question well, but that's what I mean.
No, not at all. I totally see where you're coming from. And that's a good point. And that's actually precisely why we felt the inclination to launch as a parliamentary petition. The Canadian government, one of their main characteristics in terms of their bilateral relations with the Indo-Pacific, especially when it comes to India, is their stark silence when it comes to human rights violations, both tacit and complicit, that we've seen from the BJP government, especially towards minorities, religious minorities, and Muslims in particular. So I agree they should be saying something, especially with a lot of the condemnations that we see. So, for example, really swiftly, the Canadian government condemning the situation between Russia and Ukraine, and countless other examples where, as soon as we saw a genocide alert, Canada was really one of the first nations to at least to speak up, and that typically makes a big difference, with Canada being one of the main diplomatic nations out there. But we've not seen the same actions for India. So we're just asking them to be equal in their human rights approach and not to be selective.
You mentioned the Magnitsky Act, which is a word I always stumble over. Tell us what that means.
Definitely a tongue twister, I agree. So we're basically asking the Canadian government to explore sanctions and policy measures against certain Indian government officials, particularly those that are responsible for human rights violations. So when we think about Magnitsky sanctions, it's a series of actions. So one of it includes freezing the assets of certain individuals that we're targeting. Another possible measure can be restricting their travel to and from Canada, to Canada at least. I do think that another part of those sanctions do include an embargo on arms, and that's also something else that we're exploring through recent, I would say, trade and business related discussions that we're having with the Trade Ministry in Canada for the same topic that we're covering on India and human rights.
If somebody wants to sign the petition, how do they, and when should they sign by?
So the petition is open until July, mid-July, I would say. So mid-July, and they can sign up very easily by going to saveindia.ca. We've made the URL easy to remember, so that's simply www.saveindia.ca. It's open for a little under 60 days at this point. So definitely sign. Don't forget to confirm your signature by checking the automatic email sent to your inbox, and do share it with your friends, your family, and your networks.
And once the date passes, what happens next?
So once the petition closes, we have an opportunity to watch MP Blake raise this issue in the House of Commons before the Cabinet, and hopefully before the Prime Minister of Canada. And this is one of the few really the only thing that we can do right now to force them to respond to this growing crisis of genocide incitement in India against Muslims and other minorities, including Christians and Dalits.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you for explaining to us this petition and your activism on it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching Canadian Muslim News. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe, and God bless.